Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And we are broadcasting from the KWKY Mercy One Iowa Catholic Radio studios. I am over here in Des Moines, Iowa. Me, Bo Bonner, the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Executive Vice President of the Newman Idea. You can check both those out at mchs.edu and newmanidea.org. But out there in Pittsburgh, tell the good folks what you're up to in the city of Three Rivers.
I'm the Director of the National Institute for Newman Studies, research library here in Pittsburgh, and you can find out about our work at newmanstudies.org.
But, we're now in month number 2 of living a very interesting life and interesting days. And I'm starting to realize that people are coming up with neat and ingenious ways so that people can stay connected to what they're all doing. I know, for instance, at the Newman Idea, we try to keep people up to date, not only with the newsletter, but like you said, with the website and trying to show people what we're doing to react to the new realities. Mercy College is doing similar things. I know that, announcements about how schooling's going to happen. It's good to hear people still interested in Mercy College and, getting those degrees so that they can go be the front line of helping with the health crisis that we're dealing with. NIN's trying to do similar things as well, I take it, right? Trying to make it sure that people can be connected to a research library that at the moment they're not able to travel to.
Yeah, our spring symposium, which is a pretty big event for us, it was scheduled for March 12th. And that was kind of like the day when the United States and its leaders were like, oh, something's terribly wrong. And we have to, take some drastic action. So that was thrown up on Zoom. And then our big fall conference, unfortunately, has been pushed back a year. But we have these digital collections. And thankfully, we've been working hard on that the last 18 months. And so anyone who's interested in reading Newman and engaging his writing, all of his published works are there, but also a lot of his handwritten letters and things. It's a really neat tool. You have to kind of play with it for a little bit to sort of like acclimate yourself. But once you get the hang of it, I think there's a lot there to really discover and dive into.
So we got the organizations we work for and what they're trying to do to make sure that in these trying times people can access them. Iowa Catholic Radio is the same way. Not only, of course, radio, you can listen to that at work, at home, driving around, but we're also really trying to make sure that people who can have the Iowa Catholic Radio app can hear the broadcast live, have access to other features that we're trying to make sure that people in these times have access to. So with Iowa Catholic Radio, if you're listening on the radio, that's great. You can also, of course, listen online. But another way to do this and to help us out is if you go download the app. You can donate to all of these wonderful organizations, especially at these times. But with Iowa Catholic Radio, the app, you can do that as well. You can donate online. But another thing I wanted to make sure that we let people know about is there's a lot of people teaming up to do some great stuff. And Iowa Catholic Radio teaming up with the Diocese of Des Moines, the Faith Journey Office for the Catholic Culture Lecture Series. Another thing, Bud, where we were hoping to have you with us this coming weekend in the flesh, but instead we'll have you with Zoom. And so you and I are going to give a talk this weekend. And so I'll pass it over to you. Tell the folks what it's about and where they can go to hear us yammer on some more.
So this Saturday evening, April 20th at 7 p.m., Bo and I will be talking about
April 25th.
April 25th. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm looking at the announcement and it said we'll release the Zoom invite on Monday, April 20th, but that day is passed. So This Saturday, April 25th at 7, you and I will be talking about the theology of the resurrection. And the theme, the verse will be, I am the resurrection and the life. But we'll be unpacking some of the historical significance of the resurrection, but certainly what that means for our lives today and the life of the church today. And Bo, like you're saying, I think this time has been a real struggle for the church because our life together is meant to be incarnate and meant to be Eucharistic. And I've been frustrated some with conversations about, well, the bishop should do this or do that. Like they've got an extremely difficult job, and you and I haven't been appointed to make those decisions. But I think what you're saying in part is like, ministries like Iowa Catholic Radio, and I think Faith Journey with this conversation that they're hosting, these are ways where we can continue to be together as the body of Christ, not in the fullness of what we would hope for, but riding the wave of these difficult times. So I invite everyone to join us online Saturday evening at 7. I think it'll be a great conversation.
If you want more information than that, if you just look up Faith Journey Diocese of Des Moines, that's an easy way to get to that website. Then also you can email John Wynn. His email's all over that to ask further questions. But there you go. We hope to be able to see you there. The show's always underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences, mchs.edu. I know we already brought that up, but folks, like I said, hope you go over there, look there. They've always underwritten our show. But it's also a way that if you want to know, what am I going to do with my future in these very telling and trying times, being a frontline worker, a nurse, allied health in this battle for public health in general, but of course coming to mind because of the COVID crisis, mchs.edu. Make sure to check that out. We're running up here on the break, so I just want to tell people you're in for a treat. Please stick around because we have Brett Robinson back, the Director of Communications for the McGrath Church Life Center at Notre Dame. Media and technology expert. We're going to talk about the fact that we kind of had all of the worries and dreams we had about technology are now very pressing because of what COVID has done, driving us all indoors and things like this. And there's really not a better person to talk to about this than Brett Robinson. And he's always has fascinating points to make. So stick around. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. We're back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you this Wednesday, broadcast from Iowa Catholic Radio Studios, Mercy One Studios. Thank you, everyone, for joining the show. It's an honor to have you listening to us. Today on the show, I have a guest that's coming back for the second time. Brett Robinson is the Director of Communications and Catholic Media Studies at the McGrath Institute for Church Life. In his role, he oversees outreach efforts for the Institute while conducting research at the intersection of religion, technology, and culture. Brett, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, my friend. Thank you.
So I'm gonna do a real quick personal aside that will make me sound really schmarmy, but I promise that it has everything to do with what we want to talk about. When you're a dork that reads too much Twitter news feed, you might be able to luck out like I did and start worrying about something like coronavirus clear back in January. I don't take a lot of credit for this because I was also worried about all sorts of other stuff that didn't come to pass. But my point being is, like, I've been worried about this for a while. And now that it's happened, it's this very strange feeling because being right doesn't feel that great. Like, I really wish I was wrong and that none of us would be dealing with this. Now, why this pertains to you, Brett, is you've been telling people for a long time that we really need to ask ourselves what sort of media and technology and communications world that we want. And I saw you give a talk in November, which I think a lot of people found really inspiring, really thought-provoking, in many ways scary. But for them, it could still, it was still a distance thing. Like, Brett's right. Someday this is going to be a manifest problem. Well, here we are, everybody locked up in their houses. And really the way that they communicate is through heavily mediated technology. And people are really having a time struggling with what that means. I guess what I'm asking, Brett, is how unfulfilling is it to be right with your predictions when the world that we're living in is still full of so many questions?
Yeah, it's a terrible feeling. I mean, I guess it's been 15 years, I guess, of talking about this, thinking about this, writing about this. And I think I went kind of on a journey from dystopian, well, I should say utopian, because 20 years ago I was at the University of Georgia's New Media Institute, where we were building these things on purpose because we thought we knew this was the future, and we were creating wireless clouds in college towns, and this is 20 years ago. And then about 5 years later, after working in marketing and media for a while and sort of seeing how the sausage was made, I got much darker in my assessment. And I should say, though, that I didn't stop at the sort of dystopian. I've moved to what I'm calling the apocalyptic, that something is being revealed here. And apocalypse doesn't mean sort of utter destruction, as you know. There's a uncovering, a revealing that's happening. And that's what I've become very interested in. So I don't want to claim to have owned these predictions from way back when, 15, 20 years ago. I'm heavily influenced by Guy Debord and Nicholas Carr, and people have been writing about this for far longer than I have. But they certainly persuaded me, and I think now we have to sort of revisit these arguments because they've become such a stark reality that we can't not deal with it.
Well, I think maybe a way to get started thinking about this is we throw the word media around quite easily. We forget that it's etymologically connected to the idea of a medium, right? So a mediator, this way in which not only do we have something that mediates between me, a human, and this other human, whether it's a marketing department or us right now talking through technology in order for people to hear it through the radio. But the idea is that there now becomes something in between us. And it's not just electronic media, of course, even the printed word is this way. But the idea is whenever you get media, medium, mediated, there becomes that one at least step of extra distance that we become self-aware in a way that maybe face-to-face communication, or when we're children and that's the primary mode that we think of communication, that we don't ever think about. I guess the reason I find this so interesting is to say, when we take the time to step back and ask, what does it mean to be mediated in our relationships with people, this step in between you and me, it also becomes sort of a medium of reflection. That it's times like these in 2020 where we're all jumping on video conferencing, that if we take the time, it's like you said, we can start to learn a lot about ourselves more than just the mediums through which we communicate. Do you so like if there's, I don't know if a hope is the right word, but if we're going to like benefit in any way from the situation we find ourselves in, do you think that that's the path forward, and that's what you're hoping to do with your institute?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the revealing part. I think that we're almost kind of waking up from this fever dream of, pardon the bad pun, but this fever dream of the television era, where media was this kind of one-way broadcast behemoth that sort of set the cultural agenda and helped us imagine our futures, right? Like, be who you want to be, dream big. These were the messages of the advertisers, and people largely bought into this, and it shaped their career aspirations and all sorts of things. And the digital environment, which we're now sort of locked into in our work at home pods and so forth, it demands a certain confrontation with reality and not that fantasy world that we've been presented with for 50 plus years by the advertiser. Because now we're having conversations now that's not to say that there is a huge amount of surveillance happening right now through these new media, these digital media, that it's in some ways disciplinary. I mean, there's all sorts of potential negatives there, but as you said, it opens up the opportunity for personal reflection about my own biography, my own identity, because I'm participating in this online discourse about who I am, what I believe in, why I believe it. Television didn't offer this, so it's forcing a certain recognition. Now the problem is when it's this form of discourse, it strips away a lot of really essential human qualities that are necessary, I think, for productive and intimate sort of human dialogue. The body, for instance, is missing. Space and time have been totally confused. I'm not sure. Is it Wednesday or Thursday? Right? Everyone has this sort of feeling of being lost on the calendar and even in the time of the day. And so all those big questions about space and time and bodies and all this sort of thing play into this new awareness. So it's hard to say what the net is on that. Is this? I think it's providential, right? I mean, I don't think this is part of God's loving plan that we are to engage this environment in some way, and maybe it's for our benefit, or maybe it's to make us aware of what we've been lacking.
Brett, this is Bud, and your last comment was already getting into some of this. But as someone who, thinks about these issues and has been involved in the orbit of academia for some time now, could you talk about as we've been experiencing this quick move to digital communication and teaching online and things like that? I personally have gotten a bit anxious about, like, maybe even how administrators think about this. Like, oh, we can do a lot of this without the overhead cost of lighting a room or air conditioning, et cetera. And maybe in your own experience, what's been the trade-offs? What sort of pitfalls should we think about going forward? And I guess for myself, I was asked to guest lecture in a class about 10 days ago. And the professor, when I started, asked all the students to mute their video or to turn off their video. And so I was lecturing on Zoom, and it was impossible for me to know how any of my words were being received. It was like the students could have just left the room, and it would have been, in a sense, like really no different for me. I was sort of speaking into the void. And for myself as a teacher, that was like almost kind of disconcerting in a way. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about, what this means going forward for us when we turn the curve with the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I hope people don't think this is an adequate replacement. I mean, I think that if they do think that, it comes from what James Carey calls kind of the transmission mindset of communication, that we're just transporting messages across space and time, whether those be political messages or educational messages. As long as the recipient gets what the sender was sending, then the communication's been successful, whether that's online, in person, on the phone, whatever. I think what we need to preserve and to remind people of as they maybe get accustomed to this environment is the ritual aspect of communication. So there are certain rituals and practices that go with gathering a class, for example, and having a discussion or having a lecture, everything from the presenter's body language to the body language of those in the audience, but also just the ritual of having a class and all that entails. Getting dressed, for example, right? Like, I don't know if you lectured in your pajamas or what, but you could, I suppose, if you wanted to, if you're online. So all these rituals that attend to communication and the practices that that come with them, I think those are the things we have to remind people and remember are essential to that act. So I worry about that. I mean, I think there's been obviously over the last 20 years a big push in online learning, and I think it serves some very utilitarian purposes in many cases, that adult learners, for example, who are working jobs and trying to get access to education, there's some, I think, very laudatory reasons to support that industry, but to suggest that it would mean a full-scale takeover, given that we've lived through this period now where it's been practiced on a wider scale, I think is a horrible idea.
I think part of this starts to go. One of the things that's always interesting about technology is everybody can think philosophers are dorks that overthink things, but technology really will push these deep existential problems into people's minds in ways that they don't necessarily think. On Twitter, you linked an article that talked about why you're exhausted from Zoom meetings, which is sort of this question I think a lot of us are bringing up. They're like, shouldn't we all be like well rested because we're sitting in the house and not walking around? And the article makes really good points about why it's specifically how the technology of Zoom is set up can be exhausting. But just the one that fascinated me is that gets to what we're talking about is you're not used to seeing your own face when you talk. And because Zoom puts your face among others or up in the corner, it's not that you're like a vain narcissist that you keep looking at yourself. It's that to point out to, like you said, the ritual aspect of communication. You have never been in a situation, most most likely, I mean, like, it would be rare where you would be talking with other humans and your own face would be so prominently displayed. You might talk to yourself in the mirror, or maybe you and your wife are like, in the bathroom talking to each other and you see yourself. But the idea that you could be talking to like 5 to 10 to 30 other people and you see your face and your eye movements is so inherently distracting physiologically to you that it drives your brain nuts. And there are all sorts of questions like just start reeling from that idea about what is our self-awareness in the whole situation of our life. I mean like when I am living my life and talking to people, what part of my brain, my soul, my self-awareness thinks of me as being an actor in it. And Zoom just throws us here, like you can't get away from yourself. And that starts to be the interesting questions. Not only like, why are you physically exhausted from noticing yourself, but what else do we assume about? What else do we not assume, because it's so subconscious about communication that when we instrumentalize it through technology, we forget. And that's why, it's like that, the valley, right? We get close to human communication, but there's something off. And these questions just come pouring out, I think now, because of the situation we all find ourselves in working at home.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that article. If you're not reading, for your audience, if you're not reading Michael Sakasis, who has a blog called The Frailest Thing, but also a newsletter that he's been running for several years, he is, I think, one of the most prominent thinkers on all these topics. He's bringing together a lot of really interesting literature and thought on not just this situation, but what's been going on for the last decade or so. And that was the part that jumped out to me too, was this question of why are Zoom meetings exhausting? And part of the thesis was, well, it's because we have to look at ourselves for so long. And I wonder about that one, because I as a communications professor, oftentimes will tell public speaking students to sit in front of a mirror and do their talks to sort of see facial expression and to see how they're performing. So there is actually an educational benefit to it. And I wonder if in some ways, just to sort of play devil's advocate to my own arguments, but, that if it might be helping to heal the sort of Cartesian split, that we're not just sort of these thoughts that are being projected into the ether here or to the other person, but we're this body that's speaking in real time to these other bodies, and we're watching that happen, at least in a virtual sense. It's not ideal for many other reasons, I think, that human communication requires. But again, going back to the original idea, the sort of apocalyptic idea of revealing or uncovering a self-awareness that the medium is sort of driving us to, that we are forced by the nature of this platform, by the nature of these technologies to reflect on the self, whether it be the selfie or the Zoom meeting where I'm present to myself. Now, obviously, that could lend itself to entering into some kind of narcissistic loop, and that's not good either. But, I wonder, in terms of sort of the time element and the way we treat time and the way we're losing kind of grasp and sense of it, how ordinary time and carnival time are kind of getting flipped now, because, we often leave social media or the digital environment. A lot of people got off Twitter for Lent, for example, but on Easter Monday, they were back on Twitter full force, totally energized, ready to go, have arguments, make those posts. So do we go away so that we can enter more fully and energetically into that medium? That sounds backwards to me. So that's perhaps a kind of tertiary concern around the time spent and the mode by which we spend that time in digital space.
One thing that's been interesting to me throughout this whole experience is, I have friends on social media who you could say broadly share like the same convictions about life and the world, committed to the same faith, but interpret the experience and the basically like the resolutions or the suggestions that, like officials are giving us about coping with this. And with that in mind, Brett, I'm intrigued by your idea of apocalyptic, because I think it recognizes the gravity of the situation, but it's different than being like dystopian or uber pessimistic. I guess to give flesh to this idea, like there's this idea that perhaps to contain the virus, we might need to track people's movements. And I have friends who've got, vastly different interpretations about whether this is a good or a bad thing. Like, could you just say a bit more about how do we have like a proper sort of like suspicion towards the way that technology intrudes into our lives without falling into sort of like, I don't know, like a dystopian or just like a rejection, like a Luddite sort of approach to everything that comes our way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's very relevant and important question about what is contributing to the common good. If we discern that, doing this digital tracking is contributing to the common good in some way through public health awareness and so on, perhaps we can make that trade-off of being watched. I would caution, people who are slipping into the dystopian idea, as someone who's done that many times, that we're not defined by these things by any stretch. In fact, I just wrote a column for Catholic News Service on this. This, at least for me, and everyone's kind of feed, I guess, is different, but so many graphs and charts, so much mathematical interpretation of what's happening in terms of case counts and death counts and spread and so on. And you get wrapped up in this, and you kind of lose the sense of the individual human element happening here, because we're thinking in aggregates and in algorithms and in models. And so, helping, sort of reminding ourselves that, we're not defined by those. We all have sort of these individual circumstances. If we're doing something that might contribute to the common good, taking an antibody test or, telling people where we were in the last 24 hours, we're not defined by that, just as we're not defined by these mathematical models, right? So there's certain demographic information that we know, and there's certain other kind of features that we know about this, but each individual human person is obviously unique and distinct, and doesn't necessarily have to imagine themselves as part of this aggregate as in a dehumanizing sense. So yeah, and I'm sorry that didn't answer the question, but I, if you've chosen to have the phone, you've already made the agreement, the deal with the devil to say, watch what I'm doing. I mean, I've been doing it for a long time. So might as well do something good with that.
That's a good point. On that note, this is The Uncommon Good, folks. Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar speaking with Brett Robinson. You'll want to stick around for this, but we're going to go to the break. Stick around. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. Back at The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to Iowa Catholic Radio. We have as our guest Brett Robinson, Director of Communications and Catholic Media Studies at the McGrath Institute for Church Life at Notre Dame. Brett, thank you for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Brett, one of the problems with this whole topic is I find it way too interesting, and there's only so much time, and you can only bore people so much on the radio. But I'm going to throw out two things that this absolutely fascinates me when it comes to the idea about what do we do with media, technology, and communication that goes unreflected. On one hand, it's sort of like we've said at the first of the show, the technology we use really does create the world that we live in. And what I mean by that is how we even think about how we're going to approach the world. There's this whole theory of affordances that I don't have to dork out on the show, but essentially that is to say, humans start to expect where doorknobs are on doors because we've put them there for so long and that's what you're used to. Or humans kind of get what roads are because we've all driven on roads. But in all actuality, none of that's natural, right? That's like we made doors a certain way, we made roads a certain way. And so we begin to expect things out of the world because they've long been that way. And this is why new technologies can both disrupt this world, but also why new technologies sort of refer back to old ones, because like there's a human map, as it were. We still talk about dialing into things, although no one has dialed a phone in years, for instance. But then there's sort of the opposite way that this happens. And this is something like what Pope Francis in Laudato Si is getting at. He refers to another thinker, Romano Guardini. People, if they ever get a chance, should read this. He has a book called Letters from Lake Como. And he points out that even with technology, right, there's technology, but then there's technology, right? Like a sailboat sails along with the waves and the winds, but a motorboat cuts through the wind and the waves and sort of disregards nature instead of, being a conduit to work with nature. All this is to say that, one of the reasons I was very glad, since the last time we've talked to you, I think your role in the church, the McGrath Church Life Institute, has been solidified, and I was so glad to hear this, because this is something that is on the cutting edge for theologians in the church to wrestle with, but it seems like something that we either are far behind on or only dealing with at a surface level. When it comes to things like what parents should do about technology or what the church should do, it seems like what we're missing is the terms in which we even need to grapple with the questions. Do you find that starts to be the difficulty in what you're trying to do with your work? Is that people have a sort of veneer understanding of what it means to deal with technology instead of these deeper understandings about how technology makes humans understand the world differently?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think there's an irony in the church, too, given our long history with really trying to, or maybe should have, been wrestling with this kind of change. And obviously the printing press was the last really major example of this that initiated a number of political and economic and religious shifts, the Protestant Reformation for one. So if we take the position as Marshall McLuhan would say, of the somnambulist, the sleepwalker, and we say, oh, new technology, great, we'll put the gospel message right in there and send it out to our audience, and off we go. That's the posture of the zombie, of the sleepwalker, who doesn't evaluate or analyze or discern the new environment that he or she is stepping into. And I think there's a whole host of kind of psychosocial questions that go along with that. And again, the irony being that the church, in her spiritual and intellectual tradition, has spoken of these things in volumes when it comes to the spiritual life and to Catholic life. And so for us not to engage these immediate questions with that tradition seems like a poverty that has to be overcome. And we don't want to be, reactionary or too sort of immediate in our response. One of the other virtues of the church is her ability to sort of ponder and to take some time with these things and not have a knee-jerk reaction. But I think for parents, for teachers, for pastors, there is the question of what do we do with the new medium? How do we use it well? What kind of content belongs there? Those are all fine questions. But to get to your point, I think the second layer is, what kind of effect is this having on us psychologically, spiritually, on our families, on our communities? We're seeing this, again, in very high relief in stark terms now, because we can't gather as a community. Our family life has been upended, in some ways in a good way, because we've been forced to spend more time together in that smaller unit. So I think there's just a ton of I just want to have this conversation perpetually, and I love when you guys call, because you're obviously thinking about this too. And I should mention, Bud, you're in Pittsburgh, and we just inked a deal yesterday with the Diocese of Pittsburgh to be our pilot partner in this church communication ecology program that we're launching with this Lilly grant. And I can talk more about that if you'd like, but we're going into a pretty disrupted environment in the diocese, where you have not only the clergy sex abuse scandals, but now the big shift in how people are working and trying to stay connected. And that's going to be a huge challenge for parishes, for dioceses to think through it. So we're really excited to work with an actual diocese and parish leaders and try to think through this with them.
Well, first off, that's awesome. And we had the Newman Institute had Tim O'Malley lined up to, and Jenny Martin to be here on March 12th and 13th. And of course, they did all that they could, but like 24 hours before it went down, we had to move everything online. But when you guys are in town, Brett, let me know for sure. I'll be pretty bitter if we don't grab a pint or something when you make it here to Pittsburgh.
Well, not only that, we can talk about this offline, but I'd love for you and Bo to be part of this, because you're using, I think, the medium of radio in such an effective and inspiring way to have these important conversations. And this is what we want to share with our parish and diocesan leaders who are thinking about communication environments, or what are sort of the effective mediums, and how do we use them well? That's the big question. How do we use them well? How do we use them virtuously, prudently, wisely? So you guys are a great example. So well done.
You hear that, Jimmy? You hear that back at the studio? Record that. That's going on a commercial.
Go ahead, Bud. Sorry.
Well, and Bo, send this episode to the bishop, to Bishop Jensen.
That's right.
I think this all ties in what's coming to mind for me. So my wife Rachel and I grew up evangelical, and it's been fascinating for us to watch some of our friends from high school and things navigate the shutdown. We've been kind of I don't want to sound like we're joking snidely or something, but like watching some of our friends who pastor evangelical churches, like we've talked about, one potential pitfall for them is that because they're not really Eucharistically centered, maybe they'll get to the point where they'll say like, well, we can continue this sort of thing like after everything's over. You can sit at home with a coffee and take in the entire church service online. For Catholics, of course, it's a completely different dynamic, and that's made us more vulnerable in a way, like in a sense, like masses potentially could be vectors for transmitting a virus. On the other hand, I think it's kind of like an anchor or safeguard where as things ease up, we say like, oh, we have to come together because our life is characterized by this. And I guess, Brett, the question that comes to mind is, would you say that like the use of technology on the part of the Catholic Church, is it primarily an issue of charisma, like we use this to announce the gospel, or do you see like even more creative ways that this kind of could be integrated into our life as communities?
Yeah, I think there's, I think the preaching part is essential and has already been done, I think, very well by people in the church and apostolates that are popping up around this. I know that in our own home, this is sort of accidental. Obviously it was forced on us, but attending Mass on television was something, as the former dystopian had to wrestle with around whether this is appropriate or not. But I was so taken by it because I had a childhood memory of a snowstorm in Pittsburgh that kept us from going to Mass, and my parents having us sit down and watch a live Mass on one of the local stations that broadcasted then. And what that said, I think, to me as a child growing up in the church was not so much that television is a suitable replacement for attending liturgy, but my parents take this so seriously that we're not going to use this snowstorm as an excuse to not go to Mass, but we're going to connect in any way we can, just like St. Clare did when she was sick in her bed and had the Mass appear on her wall. And that's why she's the patron saint of television. So in a sort of accidental way, we started watching daily Mass, and we attend a traditional Latin Mass. And so for my 6-year-old especially, who, and we don't expect him to know all the responses and all the prayers and so forth when he's 6. And so we want him to experience sort of the spectacle of it, the aesthetic of it, the symbolism. We can talk to him after Mass about those things, and he begins to pick up the meaning. But to have it on television in the home allows us, in a catechetical way, to talk about the parts of the Mass, to talk about what this means, what that means. And so it becomes this really amazing educational opportunity that is both embodied, because it's the family talking about it and participating in it, and also mediated because we're having to watch it through the television. And one of my great heroes is Mr. Rogers, who I think in his sort of very gentle and kind way, noticed that television was being weaponized and just methodically dismantled the weapon, and attended to the emotional life of the child and disarmed the viewer by looking right at them the whole time. So there are ways, I think, to disarm these channels of communication that can become very impersonal or weaponized, if you will, and turn them into very human moments of encounter.
Brett, that's fascinating. One way that I think this, just a personal example, now that we're all getting autobiographical in the second part of the show, you have all this extra time. And so this is Easter week. And so we were watching, like the gospel according to John, the gospel according to Mark, because they're not quite ready for the Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. I think they're a little too young. But so the question started to be like, well, and I was proud of my kids for like the kid part of me that grew up Southern Baptist was proud that my kids picked up on the fact that it seems like the four gospel writers talk about different times of the day that Jesus would have been crucified. Well, that's because like this translation of the gospel said like 9:00 noon. And so instead we had to talk about like, what is the third hour of the day? What is the sixth hour of the day? What is the ninth hour of the day? Talking about how ancient Hebrews would have talked about time. Now, this was all me dorking out. I'm like, I'm finally using my degree, Mom and Dad. I'm helping my kids. I felt really great. But it made me think, okay, technology has so changed the way we talked that like we can't imagine a world without clocks unless we get very intentional talking about it. So I had to talk to, you have to like tell your kids, and these, this kids, the world they grow up with, unquestioningly, they're like, well, everybody would know it was 9 a.m. And you go, there were literally no clocks. It made no sense to talk about 9:30, 11:38, right? I mean, 9:56 makes no sense back then. And so you talk about the first hour, the third hour, the relative, placement of the sun. That's a revolution that how would we ever wind that back? Could you imagine people walking around being like, I'm Catholic. I refuse to say 2:30. I only say the third hour of the day. And I say that, and I actually know people who are like that, so I need to settle down. But all that's to say is there's a sort of line we have to walk, which is to say the world will have Zoom in it or video conferencing or whatever. And we're going to talk about the world in a way that will always have that imprint on it. But like you said, that doesn't mean that we can have to allow it to have its full weaponary potency. That if that's the way to say it, it's like you were saying that Mr. Rogers disarmed television. And that's one way that like going to a monastery kind of disarms the clock, right? Like we're never going to go back where we say the third hour, the sixth hour. We're always going to talk about 9:38, 11:52. But you go hang out at a monastery long enough and you get a different perspective about like what time even does and what the hours are for prayer, for rest, etc. And it seems to me that's the great challenge that we have before us right now, is to say we don't need to like go blow up Zoom headquarters and like fell all of the cell towers. We need to ask by mining the depths that the church has, how do we disarm? How do we, what I always say as a turkey is, how do we use it wrong for the sake of the Lord? And, Brett, I just think that that's what your work is about. And I think it's so pivotal for Catholics to get on board with this.
I think one of the reasons theology and communication are so, I think, sympathetic and compatible is that communication, it really is, I mean, the church is communication, is a major medium of communication. The sacraments are symbolic communication. God spoke the cosmos into existence. The Word was made flesh. I mean, there's so many elements here, and I think I was looking at Genesis with our kids, and the three media or mediums through which God creates at the beginning are space, time, and form. Space, time, and form. So those are baked into our understanding of the cosmos from the beginning and our universe. So let's ask those questions. When this new media or technology comes along, how does that change our relationship to space? How does it change our relationship to time? And what are the features of the form? I don't care so much about the content. I care about the form. Christ came as a human being in the flesh. That form said it all. Now, all of his teaching was essential and important, no doubt. But you could understand the core of that salvation message in the form God took, that he took on our form. So if we pay attention to space, time, and form, if we ask those questions, I think we're headed down the right path as a church to understand the environment as it shifts, because that's how the environment was built in the first place. That's how he created it. So I'll stop there because I'm about to rant. I know you guys are going to wrap up, but I appreciate everyone listening.
Well, I mean, if it was up to us, if we were the true masters of time at the radio station, we just keep going, but we are not. So we're ending up here. It's been such a great talk, but Brett, I really want to make sure that people can go find your work, the work of the Institute. And I'm really hoping that in this time, people will reach out to you and tell you their experiences with, because I know people often say this, that they're interested in what, lay Catholics think. I know for a fact you are very interested in what lay Catholics are running up against in this very peculiar time. So let people know how to get a hold of you and be a part of this great work that you're doing.
Yeah, please. Anyone is interested in following up. The website is McGrath, McGrath.nd.edu. And I'll even give my email address just to make it quicker if someone wants to reach out. It's BROBINS6@nd.edu. The website for the program is being built as we speak. We had a symposium last summer that is on our website under conferences. If you're interested in some of the kind of academic backstory to the planning we've been doing, we had 15 presenters come in from all over the world actually and speak on this topic. So there's a lot of cool YouTube videos there to check out. But please reach out. And thank you guys.
So Brett, thank you for coming back on the show. Brett Robinson, please go check out what all that he's talking about over at Notre Dame and the McGrath Life Center. Brett, happy Easter. Thanks for coming on the show.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
Take care.
Folks, that's the uncommon good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our family, our city, our state, the nation, the entire world, solar system, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the uncommon good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.